For me, I like to use the term nature inspired because we can bring nature into our indoor environments and help children connect with their bioregion by bringing in natural elements from around, from our backyards and from our nearby nature areas, and by getting kids outdoors. So a lot of the educators that I work with are not exclusively outdoors or don't consider themselves as forest educators per se, but rather they're teaching in more traditional settings, but they know that kids need this. And so I am really passionate about it because I really believe that children, they have a right to be outside and they have a right to be able to play.
Hello and welcome to Blooming Curious, a podcast that's all about nurturing that natural curiosity in our early years kids and students. I'm Edwina, your host from the Ed's Lessons blog, a passionate advocate for play and inquiry, and on a mission to keep children curious and questioning. The days of talk and chalk are over. We're diving into the world of integrated, inquiry and nature-based learning and exploring the strategies that create lifelong learners. So if you're a classroom or homeschool educator or even a curious parent, then this is the place for you. Today on Blooming Curious, we welcome April Zajko from April's Teaching Tree. April is a master's qualified early childhood educator and a reading specialist with a passion for creating supportive learning environments for all children. April takes a nature-inspired approach to teaching and believes that nature-inspired experiences help to reconnect families and bring balance to all our lives. April has taught in both public and private schools and has worked with a wide variety of education and childcare providers. She's highly experienced in integrating nature into indoor learning environments and is finding powerful ways to meet early childhood standards through play-based, nature-inspired materials and environments. April, it's a pleasure to have you on Blooming Curious today to share your knowledge and experience with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I know I read out a little bit of a bio about you, but let's begin with you telling us more about yourself and how April Teaching Tree came about.
Absolutely. So I'm just about into my 25th year of teaching, and right now I'm teaching part-time with preschool age children ages 3 through 5 in a public school setting here in Vermont. And I found out that there's a Vermont, Australia, but it's Vermont, USA. So in the northeast part of the country. I just love getting kids outdoors. And so I work part-time with children and part-time with adults teaching higher ed college courses, both at undergraduate and graduate levels. And I lead a lot of professional development for teachers who specifically, I love, my two passions really are nature and art. And so really thinking about how can we bring kids outdoors? How can we get them connected to nature, give them these opportunities for play and integrate really process open-ended art with them. Those are my real teaching passions.
That's wonderful. Why do you feel so passionate about incorporating nature-based learning into traditional classroom experiences?
Well, over my career, I've taught in a variety of different settings. And what I find is that children really thrive outdoors. And oftentimes the kids who have difficulty in the indoor environment can really just bloom, kind of goes with the podcast name, but they really do bloom in the outdoor classroom. And so I like to use the term nature inspired. Nature-based education, I think, is a really large umbrella that includes a lot of things, including forest schools and exclusively outdoor programs and nature preschools and forest kindergartens. And it has, everybody, I think, around the globe have a different approach to it. For me, I like to use the term nature inspired because we can bring nature into our indoor environments and help children connect with their bioregion by bringing in natural elements from around, from our backyards and from our nearby nature areas, and by getting kids outdoors. So a lot of the educators that I work with are not exclusively outdoors or don't consider themselves as forest educators per se, but rather they're teaching in more traditional settings, but they know that kids need this. And so I am really passionate about it because I really believe that children, they have a right to be outside and they have a right to be able to play. And we feel a lot of this in the early childhood world. We see this push down of the curriculum and a very academic based focus, as if we're getting kids ready for something. And as in the early years, I just feel like we really need to protect play for the wellness of children, for their holistic health, their physical health, their mental health, their social emotional growth, that we really need to make sure that we're getting kids outside.
And you're absolutely right, because kids are happiest when they are outside.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's just so strange that everybody knows this, and yet we still have this push down of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, as a public school teacher, I do have to show evidence that the children are meeting early learning standards and that we are using an assessment tool. And what I have found is I really can do all of those things in the outdoor classroom if I have designed the outdoor space, if there's enough materials, or if there's opportunities for that kind of play to happen. And I I really don't see it as it has to be this way or that way. So I'm certainly not doing any kind of worksheets or very super teacher directed activities. But I know as I bring materials out, as I have playful learning invitations, that kids, they're meeting those standards that we know that we need to do in public programs. And we're doing it in a playful way, and we're doing it in a way that really sparks children's curiosities and their passion. And by observing them, we know what they want to learn about. And so it's kind of part teacher planning, but also following the emerging interest of children.
Yes, we do have the forest schools here in Australia, even there are bush schools, we have the beach schools. But I feel that those are few and far between. The majority of children, if they're not homeschooled, if they're in a traditional school setting, are in urban areas. I think it's amazing that you are trying to help get urban teachers and show them how to include nature-inspired learning. So how do you do that? I think this should be a really helpful thing to tell teachers listening, is how do you approach having that inspired by nature in an urban setting?
So to me, there's really two main ways. One is through the environment and how we prepare the environment, and how both in the outdoor classroom and also in the indoor space, what kinds of materials are accessible to them? How have we designed the space to really invite their curiosity and to spark their interest? And so environment design is one, and it really doesn't, that almost sounds like something expensive. Actually isn't, but it's more about getting authentic materials and natural loose parts and those kinds of things so that kids are really engaged in play. And so the environment is one. And then the other is really thinking about how we design the curriculum to really, I like to say at the heart of the curriculum is nature. And to me, that's really all about connecting to the seasons. And so it's not a prescribed thing. Like, I'm not spending my summer to plan out every week with a thematic plan, but rather to say what's happening right now in our space and letting that really guide reading picture books, doing projects and art things that are inspired by the season, and just becoming more aware of what's in our backyard. And what I have found true to be over the years is just more and more that children are living a very indoorized life, and they're not connected. And so whether, both in urban areas, but also even children who live in very rural agricultural kinds of spaces where you would think, oh, they have access to nature because they're in this rural space, that they're not, that they have really these indoorized lives, and that very young children are spending a huge amount of time on screens. And so helping them get outside, find the joys of being out there, the simple pleasures of going for a nature walk, or making a nature collection, or creating some sort of process art with natural materials. Like it awakens something in kids and they get excited about it.
And that has very aptly brought me to my very next question.
Mm.
Technology drives our modern world,
Mhm.
and we find it everywhere and even in young children's lives. It's something that I find personally really disconcerting, and I'm very pleased to see that the media is starting to see a connection between the negative effects of technology on young children's brain development. So that is a positive turn, but I think they're not talking about it nearly enough. So, what is your perspective on that? How do you find that balance between nature inspired learning and the use of technology in the early childhood
Mhm.
classroom?
Yeah. So for me, there's been a lot of times throughout my career where I've had this, I'm using air quotes, but opportunities to have iPads, one-to-one iPads for my class. So meaning every child could have an iPad because there's a such and such grant that would allow that. And it's like, no, thanks. So for me personally, within my own classroom, I've really pushed back against that. I do like to have an individual iPad we used for documentation, sometimes capturing maybe an interesting bird or an interesting sound that we see, or taking photographs of something that we've created. But as far as technology within the classroom, I've really just pushed back against that because I just know that there's so many other more developmentally appropriate and engaging things that I can do when the children are with me. And then another key part of that is just having supportive conversations with families about technology and my own worries about young children being on screens. And to do it in a way, that's without judgment, because I do think that families, they have to get food on the table. And sometimes they just feel like this is their only way to get 20 extra minutes in the kitchen to prepare the thing. But to really help them to see the difference between just consuming technology and using technology as a tool. So I think part of that is parent education, and doing it in a supportive way and just holding my own ground to say, no, like we had an opportunity to get a smart board in my classroom, which is essentially a giant TV that's interactive. And it's like, no, thanks. I just know that I want to hold the book and show it to them, and I want to flip the pages, and I don't want to be engaging with them in my classroom with a giant screen or with one-to-one iPads. It's just not my teaching passion. And I think that we can do better with the time we have.
Yes, in most schools now we have the screens, the interactive smart boards, and you see it on social media, you see it in schools everywhere, as teachers are using that more and more. And I'm feeling the more I read, the more I listen, the more I engage in it, is that there are better ways than switching on a YouTube video and getting kids involved in that. Because I think they get enough of that. They're already getting enough at home. And I don't think school is the place for entertainment on YouTube. I think if we're going to use technology, we need to use it, as you said before, very specifically as a tool to capture or to investigate those kinds of things. But I feel personally that it shouldn't be used for entertainment in a school environment. I think we are much better, as you said, to actually read the book, turn the
Mhm.
pages, sing the songs ourselves instead of putting on a YouTube video.
And I think of it too as even the thinking of it like with the educator having a phone on their person and being outside and maybe on a nature walk and seeing something and the kid asks, a right there kind of question of what's that plant? You know, yeah, we could grab our phone and we could identify it for them using an app that helps us identify a plant. But really, is that the question? Do we want to use technology in that way? Or do we say, oh, that's really interesting. Huh. I'm noticing that we have these really interesting spring ephemerals. So it's springtime where we are, and right now. And the spring ephemerals are these interesting little plants that they don't last very long. And it's sort of, they're kind of magical because they pop up and then they're gone.
Oh,
You know, the one of the very first ones that comes up is coltsfoot, and it has this little teeny yellow flower. And it's like and they're like, oh, well, there's dandelions, and they remember dandelions from the last time that flowers were blooming in their yards. And it's like, well, let's look at it a little bit closer. And then oftentimes kids will go, they'll notice it looks a little different, and it's growing in the forest, not out in the grass or in the yard. And so it's like giving kids the opportunity to make those observations rather than saying, oh, telling them right away what it is or using the phone to identify it. It kind of steals away that wonder and curiosity that kids have. And so I think that smart use of technology, it is a tool, but we also don't want to rely on it so much to give those quick answers. And I think kids really are, even very young children, they have that instant gratification with the phone or the technology, but it's in children's boredom and in those times when they have to sort of figure out or entertain themselves that their wonder is sparked and their curiosity is sparked. So if we were always filling in those bored times, it's like we're stealing something away from them.
Mm. And how would you, let's say you were going out with that group of children and you saw those beautiful little flowers, how would you respond to that? Would you actually take the photograph and then take it back to the classroom and then maybe print it out so that it's a physical print of the plant? Or how would you respond to that?
So when I have a group of children and we're visiting the same space over a period of time, and so say we're going on a walking field trip, and for some of the educators that I work with, that might only be once a month because they are more confined, particularly in more urban settings. They're more confined in their, fenced in sort of play areas. But maybe on these walking field trips, it's like, well, the last time we were here, these little yellow flowers weren't here. There was still snow, or it's interesting. So we kind of observe the changes that are happening. And even if going to that wild place is only once a month, we can notice those different changes. And I think that a good use of technology would be taking that picture and printing it out and then using some tools that we have to look it up and to figure out what it is. And the next time that we go walk didn't happen for a few more weeks, that little yellow flower is going to be gone and something else is going to be there. And it's just that ongoing letting the kids make those discoveries of things. And so I think when we think about like these experiences that we can have for kids, like going on walks is a really easy way. And so making sure that we can do things within our prepared environment. So in our fenced in areas, like whether it's in our garden, or little raised beds that we have, or how we design the space to bring nature in, that's one thing. But then also knowing like a walking field trip could be just a really short little walk to a green space that's different than where we normally are, or going into the community and seeing what changes are happening.
Mm. And how easy is it where you are just to take children out for a walk into a green space? Because here in Australia, there's the ratios to consider. It's getting enough adults to go on the walk with. It's getting the permission from the parents to go on the walk. So I find with those kinds of things, that would be seen as an excursion because you're leaving school property. So, that whole red tape issue and finding help to go with. So how easy is it for you guys to just pop off to the green space?
Yeah, I was actually just working with a team, a childcare team. For them, they're in a very touristy town and they can leave their space and there's a path not too far. And so what they've done is it's called like a walking field trip permission slip, or it's like families sign something, and this works here. So like in where I'm at in the public school, we have a walking field trip permission form that they can fill out. And it says clearly on the piece of paper, what's the distance that we're talking about. So we're not talking about walking 5 miles with little kids, but kind of give them a sense. And so this group that I was working with, we did a whole day of professional development and we called them adventure walks. And so the adventure walk for the toddler group is really not far at all. It's really just to a grassy field close by. But then the younger preschoolers might walk further down. They had access to a little creek area. But you're right, there is the issue of permission. But here we can do these sort of blanket permission slips that families have access. So you don't have to do it every week or however frequently you're doing. You just get them to sign that once. But yes, we do have to follow ratios. The ratio gets more. We have to have more adults when we are near water. That is a safety precaution. But as long as we're within ratio, if we're not going somewhere with water, the ratio here stays the same. If we were walking into a dangerous area or something, maybe it would be a little bit different. But with a walking field trip, I like to have a smaller ratio. So my age group, 3 to 5 year olds, it's 1 to 10. But I would never take 10 kids on a walking field trip. That would just be bonkers. There's just too many things that could, that might happen. But finding a ratio that feels comfortable for you. And maybe that means recruiting a volunteer that has done the background check or whatever you have. And maybe you could find a community member, whether it's a parent or grandparent of children who are already enrolled, or maybe it is a community member that believes as you believe about getting kids outside or getting kids connected to nature. And what I find, I've had a lot of success previously with grandparents because they do have a little more time on their hands and they grew up with more nature and more ability to explore their communities. Maybe the parents of these kids have had.
So I think the takeaway there is that there aren't any obstacles. It's about just being creative and finding a solution to be able to do the thing. I love that thing that you've said about the walking field trip or the walking adventure permission slip, which would really cover all that. So that's just a great way around any of those boundaries and obstacles we put in our way. I think if you want to do something, you find a way around it.
And I think part of it too is communicating with families, or for those educators who have administrators who are, well, wait, why are you doing that again? I think part of it is being able to communicate the value, like what are children learning when they're on that? And so it's going beyond the fence, particularly if you have a small fenced in area. Yes, might have the right minimum square footage for each child, but there's so many things that this whole exciting world of going for walks. And even if they're really quite nearby, there still has that sense of adventure and these opportunities for kids to engage in things that they just don't see on the regular. And so whether it's like going to a local park or a nature trail, or even one of my college students teaches in a very urban area, but he was describing how just walking like 3 blocks away, there's this lot that's, I forget the term for it. I think they're doing regenerative agriculture. And so they're bringing this little lot back to life. So these kinds of adventures, like there's all different kinds of possibilities for discovery and exploration and learning, and just the things like that you couldn't replicate that in the indoor classroom. And so I think communicating to the stakeholders, the families, and your administrators is the why behind what you're doing. And I call my outdoor space my outdoor classroom. And that's very intentional because it communicates that when we're out here, it's not like we're taking a break from real learning, but rather this is part of our day. This is part of being out here. This is part of the curriculum for my students. And it's not like we're just taking a break to have recess, but this is the outdoor classroom and these are the things we're doing. And going on those adventure walks also is a way that we're learning. And it's going to look very different if you're going on a walk with infants and toddlers versus going with preschoolers or going with school-age children. Like the kinds of things that we would be doing look differently. But I think it's important to communicate that it's not just we're going for a walk to kill some time, but we're going on a walk. And these are some of the things that happen today on our walk, and communicating the value of that. And I love the research of Claire Warden, and she talks about the inside, the outside, and the beyond. Yeah. And so what I'm describing as an adventure walk is really that going to that beyond. And sometimes people think the beyond has to be like some grandiose, huge experience. And it's not at all. We can find all kinds of things, even nearby. We have in our community, we have a lot of rail trails where railways used to be. So they're very flat. They're not paved. They call it crush and run. So it's kind of like a gravel surface. But even in something like that, there's all kinds of things happening. We're seeing insects that we wouldn't see in our fenced-in areas necessarily. But just going on those adventures, wandering through a nearby forest, or going on little scenic or even going to a spot and having a picnic. Like these are experiences, what I found is many children haven't had those, but it broadens their world of what they can interact with. And I really think it fosters their curiosity and their like, oh, I didn't know this place existed. A couple of years ago, I was with a group of fourth graders. So that here would be 9-year-olds, 9 and 10-year-olds. And we went on it was a winter activity program. And so every Friday, the school children would go on different experiences. And I was with a group going snowshoeing in the local town forest. And so we got there and it was we did have to take a bus to that one because it's a little bit too far to walk. But we got there and we got out onto the trail and the kids were like, I can't believe this exists. And this one girl I was talking to, she was just like really in awe. And it was a really beautiful day. Like the snow was like that clumpy snow on the trees. And like, I just can't believe this is right here. It's so close to the school. And I was like, oh, yeah. Are you new to the community? Did you guys just move here this year? Because I didn't really know the group of children. And she's like, no, I've lived here my whole life. And I'm like, how can you be 9 or 10 years old? And this is a little town, like, and not know that this natural space exists. So not just building their connection to the plants and the insects and such, but actually becoming aware of their local environment, I think is really huge.
April, I live in Perth, Australia. The beach is a 10-15 minute drive away.
Oh.
I have had children in my class that have not been to the beach. And so these kinds of experiences that we as educators can give children are so crucial because many of them do not have them in their own families. So if you are going to take children on this little field trip or on a walk, one of your biggest justifications is that you are giving children experiences that they are not normally getting. I think as educators now, our purpose has almost changed. We're not just teaching curriculum anymore. We're teaching just about everything, manners, social emotional well-being, as well as introducing them to spaces that are on their doorstep because many kids aren't actually getting those experiences. And as you said, I think we need to give children those experiences, those adventurous experiences, because we all know, we all love adventures, right? And those are the things that you remember and that stay with you. That girl's never going to forget that. I think that's really important because that's catalyst for getting those interested in nature and interested in experiences outside of four walls.
I was thinking even like during that experience with the girl, I was like, okay, when I get back to the building, I want to create a map of where this place is. You know, what's the physical address of it with a aerial photo of like, you park here and this is where we walked. Because obviously there are community members that don't know, but you're right. It is a memorable experience and it does create these lasting memories that are really meaningful for kids. And that's what we want is a well-rounded education for kids, you know? And so it's like we get out there, their environmental awareness about what's here, right here in our own backyard. And when they feel that appreciation, it's those firsthand nature experiences, especially I feel like those times when kids are like, whoa, it's like, yes, that's what we want. And so they build this connection to their community. And so if their family doesn't know about it, then yes, we've given them this opportunity to go there and then providing information to the family so that they could go back. Or maybe it should be, maybe we should do a family event where we meet on a Saturday and do something like that, because we do want this sense of this connection to our local community and our natural surroundings. And it helps us at the school that I'm at. Once a year, they go on a hike up the same mountain every year. And I think it's really neat because the young kindergartners, the 5-year-olds, that is a huge physical test to get. I mean, this is not really that challenging of a hike, but to a 5-year-old it is. But by the time they finish with our school in 6th grade, it's like they can zip up that mountain and they're familiar with it. So they really develop this sense of confidence or pride, in how they get up there. And they have this sense of place. Like this is part of, they belong to this place. They know where it is. And so when we think, well, what's really important for kids? It's yes, I want my preschoolers to have alphabet knowledge, but I really want them to have emotional well being. I want them to feel good so that they can, like outside is often a relaxing kind of stress reduction, fun time for kids. And I feel like there's a different dynamic of how the children interact with one another when we're outdoors, especially in our outdoor classroom space, but in these sort of adventure walks. I think too, the kid maybe who struggles in the indoor classroom with like following the rules or whatever. In this kind of adventure walk, they can be the first one in the line. They could be the leader. It's like their self-concept, I think, changes a bit. And that's just, I think, amazing. And so when we think about, we have such a obesity epidemic here in the US, getting kids out and getting kids feeling good in their bodies, moving their bodies and challenging themselves, like walking and running and climbing up rocks or balancing and those kinds of gross motor skills. Yes, they have a bit more of that in the outdoor classroom, but when we go into the beyond space, it really promotes, I think, those gross motor skills as well.
Because in nature, there's so many challenges that aren't planned for. You've got to, when you cross the stream, for example, you might have to tippy toe on little stepping stones or balance on a log. And so that really tests some of those natural physical characteristics and abilities that we have. And so those that unpredictability of nature and the outdoors is so important, not just for our physical development, but also for our brain development, because that is how we were meant to learn. Because as humans, we're losing our connection to nature, but actually we have to try and remember that we really are part of nature. And so to get kids into those spaces is so important for really who we are and who we're meant to be. And I think for many people, we've become so urbanized that sometimes people think that, oh, it's just those sort of hippie, greeny types that go outside. Well, it's not like that at all. And as you said before, something as simple as just going on a walk, switching off the phone, switching off the technology, because for parents and for teachers, you very quickly find how beneficial this is to your emotional state, how calming it is on the nervous system to be outdoors and to be in nature. So I think that this should really be the focus, at least in a week, if not every day, to get out into nature and just walk.
Yes. And I think there is definitely, we have a very risk adverse society here, where people, it's like, well, that sounds a little risky. And it's like, yeah. And if kids never try climbing and balancing on things, then are they fully developing their bodies? Like if they're only on play structures with very uniform sized steps, and they're not having to really negotiate or challenge their body, it's really not good. So I think kind of unpacking a little bit our own feelings around risk, and obviously we're not putting children into hazardous situations, but rather defining for your program, what is risk, and communicating that to the stakeholders, both the families and your administrator of, we really value risk because there's a lot of benefits. And then sharing with them, what are those benefits about? I think in giving kids those opportunities to challenge their body, they're building their self-confidence. They're going to have more opportunity. Yes, they might fall. Yes, they might get some scrapes, but they're going to really, it teaches them that resilience and that persistence, being able to get up and brush the dirt off and keep going. And kids who haven't had those kinds of experiences, they can feel really overwhelmed by it. But I think we want to reinforce that whole emotional regulation. Not all things in life are easy. And so sometimes the child who really, it's circle time at the rug, was the first one to shoot up their hand and always knows the answer and super smart, got all the ideas and whatever, but then gets outside and can't balance on the log to cross the stream, or other kids are willing to take chances or test out their balance and their coordination and their endurance. And it's like, you know what? That's really important for them too, to really test their limits a little bit. And obviously, we're there to support them. But I think when they have this opportunity to, and when I'm talking crossing a stream, I'm talking like super shallow. We have this little creek that literally like dries up.
It's not a
And
raging river.
no, this is not like class 4 rapids or anything, but learning how to carefully step, either whether it's on stones or a log or something to cross it. And you'll see some kids stand back and go, you can see they're not sure about it. And they'll watch their peers, their friends do it. And maybe they don't try it today. Maybe they don't try it for a few weeks. And then when they do it, oh my gosh, it's like hands in the air. They're like, they have this expanded feeling of like, yes, I accomplished this goal. Those kinds of experience, they're not going to get sitting with an iPad. They're just not going to do it. And so we want them to see, like, have these opportunities to test their limits. And I think sometimes that we're in such a risk adverse society that they might get hurt. And it's like, well, yeah, they might skin their knee. And that's part of childhood, you know?
I was thinking for a lot of these kids, the focus is very often on the academic side, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as you get older, maybe you go to college and then you get a job, it's not all unicorns and rainbows. It's hard. It's tough.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to come
Mm-hmm.
up against challenges. And those are the times when, if you've had those challenges and taken those risks out in nature, then the risks
Mm-hmm.
and the challenges that you start to experience in your working life or your life in college, they become manageable because you've
Yeah.
learned through your
Yeah.
childhood how to manage
Yes.
those risks and to take chances and to figure out how to do things and to figure out how to step to cross a river. Those things actually give you the skills to learn how to navigate the problems that are going to
Mm-hmm.
come later in life. So, as you said, I think educating stakeholders is a really important part of this
Mm-hmm.
process.
Yeah. And like, even I think sometimes too, something that holds educators back is, well, I'm not an expert. I don't know the names of all the plants. I don't know what the trees' names are, or I don't know. And it's no, the kids aren't looking to you to be a walking encyclopedia or field guide. No, like they are going to experience it. So I just encourage folks to just try even short little walks, a short little adventure. You know, like, see how it goes. Don't go on some way distant thing that's overwhelming. Go on some nearby nature little adventures and see how it goes. Like those little baby steps, I feel like really do add up to building both the confidence of the adult and the excitement of the children. And so, yeah, sometimes kids are like, oh, why do we have to do this? Oh, don't let that stop you. If they're always indoors, they'll be like, what is this place? Or why do we have to do this thing? But once they get out there, I really do. I've seen it where kids who are really reluctant will get excited about it, or they start to know the places that they're going to. A group of kids that I worked with years ago, there was this one place in the forest with a big boulder and then a smaller rock in front of it or next to it. And they were like, we have to go to Turtle Rock. And they named this place. And now that the place had a name, it was like magical. And this was so close to the door of my classroom, but it was up a hill and it was in the forest. So it was like you couldn't see the building. And so for them, it was like we really were on an adventure, even though if we really needed to, we could get right back to the building quite easily. But I think like this idea of just giving kids the opportunity to go, it doesn't have to be something grandiose. It can be really simple. For people who don't have that nearby access, it does cost money to take children by bus, but I would encourage adults in that situation to really think about, we want children to have access to these experiences and we want children to have equitable access. They have a right to be connected to nature. And so to consider writing grants and saying that the purpose of this is for children to connect to their local ecosystems that they're not. And we have one particular grant here where it gives money for bus transportation for school children to go to farms so that they have firsthand experiences at these farms, local farms, because even both urban and even rural kids aren't having these farm experiences that children love. They love those experiences. So I think having that mindset of this is important and I'm going to make time or I'm going to advocate for it and see how we can make it happen. And if for some reason it just can't happen, like there's too many logistical things that just can't happen during the school day, consider the idea of it being like a family field trip or a family experience. Maybe you go berry picking with families, or maybe you have a winter family snowshoe hike, or come up with things that are in your local communities. And what I find is there's often lots of partners, there's lots of organizations that part of their mission is to help people get connected to nature. And so partnering up with them, maybe meeting up at a nature center or meeting up at a community center might be the way to do something a little more low cost, but I really think identify what the barriers are and then figure out how to overcome them.
And as you were talking about finding the funds often to go on these trips, I was thinking, well, maybe part of that budget that they use for technology, maybe a little bit less of that, and actually take that and put it into field trips and getting outdoors. Because I often say, and I'd love to know what you think about this before we move on to the next little bit that I want to talk about, is that people say, but kids need to be on technology because it's the way of the future and they need to know how to code and they need to know. Have you seen how easily a child can figure out an iPad? They know how to use that thing even before you have. A 2-year-old knows how to use a remote for a television and to switch on all the little systems within 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. It's not.
They are going to be just fine. They can learn that stuff at a drop of a hat and in split-second time. So we do not have to prepare them for that in the first 8, 9, even 10 years of their lives. They will be able to pick that up within a week. So there's no concern about that. Rather, I would say, let's do things that are really meaningful and really would aid and help their social emotional well-being, and it's going to stay with them for the rest of their life. And they have all the time in the world to figure out how to code and do technology, but that connection to nature, they might not always have that opportunity. Now, before,
Absolutely.
perhaps I should just get off my soapbox there because that is something I feel really strongly about. Now, April, you also said right at the beginning how not only is this nature-inspired education a passion of yours, but so is art. And art in an education setting, especially in a nature-based education setting, I think we're probably talking there about art like process art and art that you create using nature. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things as we're teaching and as we're getting to know kids more and more, we start to see these trends. And one of the things that I realized is that many of the children that I work with don't have easy access to art materials, and including just pen and paper. I mean, like markers and paper. And, sometimes I think that lack of opportunity. And so we know that art is so great. And so I think nature art in particular, like having kids have the opportunity to do interesting things outdoors. And so providing these opportunities might look like things like bringing out materials to do leaf rubbings. That's like a classic autumn activity that we can do. So kids have leaves and they're taking leaf rubbings, and it's like, whoa, it's part art, but it's also really interesting science, right? Like observing closely the veins of a leaf and noticing that this type of leaf looks different, is a different shape than this one. But having access to materials. So I don't feel like you have to bring out all of the art materials into the outdoor classroom, because I use the indoor space equally as I'm teaching indoors and outdoors. But using natural materials to create land art, or the kids will gather up natural loose parts, so like leaves and pine cones and little twigs and sticks and pebbles or rocks, and creating things like ephemeral art so it doesn't last. Maybe we start making nature faces one day, and kids are really enjoying making the nature faces, but we're not gluing all those bits down and then taking it home. And we're just making them for the joy of it. And maybe we take photographs of it, or maybe we don't. But starting to look at materials a little bit differently. And so making nature collages, taking some of those natural loose parts back into the indoor classroom where I do have more of an open-ended art center, so that there's lots of different materials that children can choose from. There's tools like scissors and hole punches and a variety of things that kids can use to build their fine motor skills. But then they also have the traditional art supplies, so paper and glue sticks or white glue, um, different types of writing instruments, markers or crayons, colored pencils, and they have access to oftentimes, it seems to be, especially in the autumn for here, I just feel like even the colors of autumn and all of the leaves falling, it's like these natural little treasures. But having some natural materials in the art center as well, so that children can create open-ended. And so some kids will do nature collages, some will just be interested in playing with the materials. But I think that having a variety of tools and open-ended art materials is just really great experiences for kids. When we're making things in the outdoor classroom, I really love having cardboard, like corrugated cardboard. So if we are making something that they are going to take home, I find that having that is so much easier in the outdoor, especially if it's a little windy that day or the ground is a little damp. The corrugated cardboard is a great base for things, and then kids may use that to make collage or come up with their own ideas with the materials. But I just feel like these are experiences that kids aren't having. Same thing with paint. Like many children are not using paint at home. So thinking about giving them the opportunity and the access to do painting, whether that's on an easel in the indoor classroom, or maybe it's hanging up some in the outdoor classroom. Sometimes we use oversized cardboard that they can paint on, so more like group murals, things like that. Or they're using washable, tempera paint to even paint on natural materials. So painting on leaves and making leaf prints is a wildly fun kind of thing. And so it doesn't have to be complicated, but I think just having access to materials and letting kids decide what they want to do with it. So when I think about process art, really to me, the definition of process art is easiestly defined as open-ended, meaning kids get to make decisions about what it is. So even on a day where I've brought out paper and crayons that are peeled, and my plan is to show them how to do a leaf print, or sorry, a leaf rubbing. If another kid decides to, oh, not interested in a leaf rubbing, I want to just draw with the crayons. Well, of course, that's encouraged. But I think that there's a lot of benefits to incorporating process art, both indoors and outdoors. And it really, to me, comes down to a lot of self-expression and them being able to make choices about how they use materials. And for that reason, I just love to think of my role as the provider of the materials, and then really stepping back rather than saying, it has to look, you have to do it this one certain way and have it very teacher directed. That's not the goal.
I think when it comes to process art, we always have that cohort of children that want perfection, and they
Oh,
put
yeah.
a lot of pressure on themselves.
Hmm.
Or maybe the pressure comes from home environment where everything has to be right. You get those children
Mm-hmm.
that don't want to even try something if they think that they're going to fail or they're not going to excel. And so
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to this process art, where it doesn't matter what the product is, what matters is your experience of creating it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found working with children doing process art is that pressure of the final product is
Mm-hmm.
removed. And so they're
Yeah.
just enjoying the process of creation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you're working with those children that put a lot of pressure on themselves, those little perfectionists, something like process art can really break down those barriers for them and actually
Mm-hmm.
get them to enjoy themselves more rather than worrying about producing something extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that as soon as the adult makes an example of what the thing is supposed to look like, it's no longer process art. It's totally product oriented because this is what you're working towards achieving. And for those perfectionist children, sometimes they won't even start because, for example, they have this image of, or they know what their name looks like and they can't make it look exactly like that. Like that could even be a barrier for them. So we live in a very Pinterest age. It's really easy to pop on Pinterest and print out whatever and spend the weekend cutting out all of the pieces and then make the super cute penguin or whatever. And it's like, is this art? No, this is creating
Craft.
a product. Yeah. And it's like, yes, it can, nothing against the penguin, but it's really not meeting the goals of, or it's not helping the child. It's at best, it would be like a following directions activity. And at worst, it's just frustrating because they're wasting their time on it when rather if we kind of open this up and we provide natural materials, they have leaves or sticks and stones or whatever it is that we have, twigs, and have a collection of recycled materials. So in my indoor classroom, it's a lot easier to manage having collage kinds of materials, but having recycled or found objects, milk jug lids that are different colors or recycled bits of whatever from packaging, kind of repurposing kinds of materials. And then having a variety of art materials. Sometimes things that kids come up with, I'm like, particularly as they start to go from 2D flat creations and then they start to build up, it's like, woo, that's really interesting. And they get into using tape and doing sculptural kinds of three-dimensional things with the materials that are offered. That's really exciting to see. And same thing in their writing, like we are in their drawing, we keep samples of their drawing for my preschoolers as like a year-long portfolio. And I bind it at the end of the year and they take it home. But man, it's amazing to see how a 3-year-old goes from just, essentially scribbling to beginning to do representational drawings. And I think the more fun that we make that process, like we're not putting pressure on them to do that, but we're noticing. I think the perfect catalyst for art too is bringing attention to the picture books that we're reading and noticing how is the book made and oh, this book is from the author and illustrator is Eric Carle, and notice how, and then talking about the process that Eric Carle uses, like he painted these papers, then cut them out to make these interesting collages. And to me, collage is one of my favorite mediums for kids because even 2-year-olds can make collage. And so we can meet with success in a lot of different ways, which feels like a lot less pressure than some very teacher directed here's the example and yours should look like mine. Process art to me is just can be really joyful process. And we can certainly do it outside as well. So having portable art supplies, I don't like to take a whole lot of things outside, but even just bringing, different, whether you call them um, art invitations or art provocations, where we're bringing some materials out and kids will use them in different ways. But I think it's so much fun and thinking too, what kinds of things can we do in the winter as well? Because sometimes we think of art as just in the warmer temperatures, but even, painting the snow or bringing out loose parts when it's snowing and making designs or land art in the snow. And one of the beautiful things about outdoors too is that you can go large scale. So that's where I was mentioning like larger cardboard boxes that kids are painting on. It's going to be a different scale than when we're working in the indoor classroom. And of course, we know like all of this is cross curricular too, because as we're doing it, we are we're making connections to the books that we're reading, and there's a literacy connection, and there's connections to different scientific concepts. Like we had a lot of ice, and so we sprinkled some rock salt, like kind of chunky salt, or Epsom salts, I think is another name for them. We sprinkled some of that onto the ice, and then we could hear the ice cracking, and then the salt in the ice would make these little tunnels, and it was really fascinating. So we brought them back into the indoor classroom, and then we're like, well, what would happen if we put some colored water? So we used liquid watercolors and then put that on top. And so then the colors went down into the channel. And it was like, man, there's so much science happening here. One, the effect of salt on ice, that the salt makes the ice melt faster. And then how we could actually hear it, not just see it. And then also I think about how sometimes when we talk about these things in isolation, it's like we have to remember they're actually really cross-curricular activities. And all of this supports the early learning standards as well, from fine motor development to communication skill, and the list really goes on.
When you were saying that, I lived in Scotland for many years, and the penny has just dropped for me why they used to sprinkle salt on the roads. So I don't know whether they sprinkle salt on your road, but now, that's why they sprinkle salt on the roads. And then kids can actually make those connections. So once they've made that connection, well, the salt dissolves the ice. So, so why do you think they sprinkle salt on the roads then in the winter? And then they could actually have those moments where they make those scientific connections to the everyday experiences they're having. And to me, that's true learning.
Absolutely. And, it's like having those experiences multiple times too. So it's not like, oh, well, check that off. We did that one day. We're moving on to the next thing. But I had a few years ago a group. It was a very small group. Actually, it was in 2020 in the fall when we came back. When we reopened, my group was really tiny. And they that winter were really interested in ice. And so we did all kinds of ice experiments, from freezing small toys in it, noticing the differences between, we'd have to put like our eyewear on because we were like smashing the ice to get stuff out, noticing how the plastic toys would come out just fine. But when we would put a natural material in there, like pine cones, oftentimes the pine cones would break, or the seashells broke because we're using force on the ice. We were cracking things. It wouldn't happen when it was like the plastic milk jug lids or the plastic little dinos. Like they would stay in one piece. That, to me, it's like those multiple experiences, just like a kid likes to have the same story read to them at bedtime for, I don't know, 6 or 12 months. We're like, really? Why again? But you know what? They're still processing something from it, and they're still getting something from it. And so I think about that with art opportunities. If they only ever get to paint, like if they only can paint once a month, they're not really getting the full benefit of what is it like to mix the colors together. And so sometimes teachers will talk about the colors that just all ends up, even if they had painted something that looked nice, quote unquote, they just kept painting, and then it's just a big blob. And it's like, well, guess what? It was the experience of painting that's important for their development and their learning than it is about them having a perfect picture to take home. In fact, they get so much more of being able to do it the way they want to, rather than having us stop them at a certain point and say, okay, you're all done. I mean, obviously, once the paper starts to disintegrate and fall off the easel, okay, we do have to sort of say, maybe it's time for another sheet of paper. But I think process art is just great for them to, experiment. And the whole thing is for them to try out and get familiar with the materials. And so I know a few years ago, there was a lot of promotion on social media about using glue sponges. So kids would just dip the thing into this sponge that had been soaked with glue.
Oh, yes, yes.
And you're like, wait a minute. It's really important that they learn how to actually open the glue bottle, pick the little thing off, and then glue the things on, and use the fine motor skills that it takes to open up that, and to learn how, when it's open and when it's closed, and what to do if it gets clogged up. and then to use those little hand muscles to squeeze the glue. And yes, they're going to make a puddle of glue, but guess what? That's how you learn how to glue. So it's like, what's your objective? Them gluing as quick as possible or them learning the skills of how to glue? For me, I want them to know how to glue, not just how to dip it into, glue sponge because it's faster. And when we offer them just those like close-ended kind of craft activities where everybody's making them, they're enjoying the process of assembling the things that an adult had cut apart, but they put it on the drying rack and then they go back over and they don't know which is theirs because they all look the same. That is product art. And gosh, if we only have them for so much time, where do we really want to spend our time? Is definitely in the process, giving them the opportunity to really foster their own creativity and their imagination. And many kids don't have those opportunities beyond the classroom. So I think it's really important to value that.
Years ago, Claire Warden actually said that we need to get away from this whole thing of having 25 identical yellow ducks hanging from a washing line across the classroom. And what you've just said reiterates that, because if all the craft, all the art looks exactly the same, then we're actually reducing the child's voice and their individuality. And that is not art, and that is not them expressing themselves, and that does not show the child's voice or giving the child agency and saying, this is mine, I've created this, and mine actually looks totally different to everybody else's, and how cool is that? Because even as a parent, when you come into the classroom, as you've said, okay, so they're all the same. So which one, you want to see that yours is different. You want to see that yours stands out, that it's not like everybody else's, because you are different and you are not like everybody else.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we think of these like projects that we send home as kind of parent pleasers, because parents are often excited to see something that they know what it is, And so like the book Leaf Man, do you know that story? It's called Leaf Man. It's by Lois Elhurt. And she used leaves to make leaf collages. And it's a really beautiful book. And so often, we'll kind of use that as an inspiration to do leaf art projects. And one year, there was an adult in my room and they helped the children come up with very specific things. These are 3 to 4 year olds. And their projects looked like, I don't know, 5th or 6th graders had made them. Like they were very intricate, very, very intricate. And I was like, okay, if I put these materials out, this isn't what they can do. This is what the adult sitting next to them did. And it was like a real teaching moment for me to reinforce the idea of what process is about. This really isn't about them creating something specific, representational of a duck or representational of a fish or something that was in the book, but rather than just kind of coming up with their own sort of thing. But I think sometimes communicating with families so that they understand when their child, especially the 3-year-olds, and they're coming home with these brown blobs that they've painted, there was a lot of learning that happened, beyond that. Because if I had sent home a coloring sheet that we told them they had to, I couldn't even imagine saying this, but you have to color in the lines. You have to do it this way, or you can, because it's this, you can only use these certain colors. I think sometimes when parents see the brown blob, they're like, well, what is this? So I think communicating to families too about the value of the process is really important. And communicating with our coworkers about this is the work of the children. And sometimes it doesn't look like much, but it's important to them. And when they go to the drying rack, they know their brown blob because it's important to them because they created it.
And I always find it amazing that children know exactly, they don't even have to put their names on. Everybody in the class knows exactly who it is.
Yeah.
You can just ask them, hold this up, there's no name on it. Who does? Oh, no, it was such and such a name. I know whose it is. That's amazing because they've already identified what belongs to who. But if they all look the same, well, we don't know because they all look the same. So I've always found that absolutely fascinating that children just know. They know who it belongs to. They know their friends. They know their style of creation. It's incredible. April, I'm becoming aware of the time. And I know that we should probably start wrapping things up. I wanted to know, what do you think for the future? What do you see trends emerging in early childhood education
Mm.
related to nature-based learning and process art? What do you think the future holds?
I am an optimistic person and wear rose-colored glasses, and so I feel really encouraged by, to me, the interest, particularly with nature-based approaches, and more people knowing, some who only discovered these approaches because of COVID and they moved outdoors as a mitigation technique to stay healthy, and then finding joy out there and finding that they really enjoyed it. And so I feel like more and more people are interested in this, and that whole idea of nature inspired. Like, we don't have to be in a particular box. Like, we don't have to be fully outdoors. It doesn't have to look like a certain way, but rather what will really work in this setting or in this type of program? What can we make work? And so I have a Facebook group called Nature Inspired Teachers. It's a closed group, so people have to answer some questions before they join. And one of the questions is about, like, what do you love, or what is something that you really appreciate about nature? And it's beautiful, some of the things that people say. And then the second question is, what supports do you need to help this in your own classroom? And what I find is that people really are looking for easy things to get started and to feel the support of others. Because oftentimes you might be in a more traditional setting and you're the lone wolf. You're the only one who's like thinking about going on adventure walks. And then it can feel like, wait, why am I doing this? Is this important? Or maybe the teacher next door to me is making these really beautiful teacher crafts, and parents are happy with all of the yellow ducks hanging on the wash line. And so sometimes it feels like you're straying from the status quo, but I feel like more people are interested in it. And the more that we can find supports for them and encouragement, whether that's through resources or just helping them overcome those limitations or those barriers that they see. And sometimes those barriers are actually what they might think is really huge barrier. When they have other people's eyes on it, like, it isn't as big as they maybe perceived it to be. So I guess I would say, like, working in community, and if that community doesn't exist in your current school or in your current childcare program, finding community, I think, with others is a really great way to be inspired, to find the encouragement, and then find the ways, the resources, or what you need to make it happen. And I've mentioned this several times during our chat, but the idea of really communicating with our stakeholders about why you're doing what you do. Because it could look like, oh, she's just spending a lot of time outside because she doesn't want to do the work of the indoors or something, but rather communicating, what is the value of this? What is the benefit of this approach for both I think of the whole child, and communicating those values so that families really understand why you do what you do. And so when their kid comes home dirty at the end of the day, they're like, oh, good. They clearly they were outside, or that administrators feel that way. But I think part of it is just learning. We have a huge body of research, a growing body of research that supports a nature-based approach. And I think that it takes community to really feel connected, and that continual inspiration to do the work.
I think that's really good advice. So thank you for that. April, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Sometimes it can feel really overwhelming. So I think for me, teaching truth is, through action, we get the clarity. So sometimes people might be like, well, I don't have it all figured out, or I feel like I don't know enough before I do it. It's baby steps, It's like the baby step might be that you bring plants into the indoor classroom, and that's how you're bringing nature in, by having living plants. And maybe you start with the simplest living plants. Don't start with orchids. Start with something really, really simple that is hard to kill. But in the outdoor classroom, just think about, what can I bring into this fenced in area that adds nature to this. And that's probably an ongoing thing of bring in a basket of something and then bring in some more loose parts or some tree cookies or something. But little baby steps, I think, adds up to it. It's keeping it simple so that it's not like another thing on our to-do list, but rather getting outside to me brings a lot of joy for me. And I just notice the changes in kids. And then I'm like, oh, this is really worth investigating and making it work. And whatever the obstacles are, like we're resourceful and creative people. We can figure out how to work around that and just take those baby steps and build community. And if you don't have the community right there where you are, find community in the virtual world.
That's wonderful advice. And I think that is so true, community. And also, you don't have to know it all. It's a learning process, and asking the community for their help, but also asking the children, and then you can learn together. And even children and families could support the whole process. And you'd be amazed at what you'll get once you've involved the community, and you'll see they will start bringing truckloads of things to you that you have at your disposal for your art and for that whole connection to nature. So you just have to ask, I've always felt, and the community provides. They're very generous. April, where can people get hold of you? So anybody listening, because you do a lot, you're not just working with children, but you also are supporting adults. So how can people who want to get involved more with nature-based learning and even process art, how can they get hold of you and how can they get your support if they need it?
I would say the best way to connect with me would be through my Facebook group, which is Nature Inspired Teacher. There is, like I said, there's a few questions before you join the group, but those questions really help me to think about the resources that I create and share within the group. And so Nature Inspired Teacher on Facebook group is the best way. If you want to get onto my mailing list, join the group. When you're joining the group, you can put your email address in there, and I send out a weekly newsletter. And in the newsletter, I really aim to deliver a lot of value and really good resources that support teachers in doing, whether it's activity ideas or just, we talked earlier about outdoor classroom design and just practical things that teachers can use. So with the Facebook group, you can join. If you join and add your email, that's really the best way. And I do have a resource that I'll share a link with that'll be you could post in the show notes.
Absolutely.
So people could get more information there as well.
Thank you. And I will put all the links to April's resources in the show notes. So anybody listening can just click on there very easily and go and get them. April, this has been an amazing conversation, an amazing opportunity, I think, for anybody listening. And I hope that they have been as inspired as I have been, because this is the way forward. I talk about going back to the future because we really do need to go back to those original connections we have because we're losing them. And if we want any kind of future, I think we need to go and reconnect with those basic, simple things that we're meant to have a connection with. So I really thank you for bringing that to the forefront and helping people to see with your generosity and your knowledge in this area just how amazing it is for children and how they benefit in nature-based activities and in nature-based learning. So I thank you on behalf of everybody listening for your gracious input to Blooming Curious today. So thank you very much for that. And I really hope that we'll see more of you, and perhaps in a later date you can come on again and we can talk more about that.
Absolutely. Well, my husband and I want to come to Australia in 2028 for the eclipse. You have I don't know if you know, but you'll have a full totality, a solar eclipse in 2028. So we're planning July 22nd of 2028.
I look forward to it. I'll be waiting for you in 2028. That'll be amazing.
We could reflect on how much has happened in the last 4 years.
Brilliant. Okay, April, thank you so much for being on Blooming Curious, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks for listening to this incredible episode with April from April's Teaching Tree. I will link all her details in the show notes so you can get it there. And if you would like more strategies and insights just like these delivered to your inbox, and you want to be part of a community of curious, innovative educators, then you should really subscribe to my free weekly newsletter. It's called Get Curious. My subscribers get access to all the juicy bits and inside information. So go and sign up at resources.bloomingcurious.com/get curious. I'll link it in the show notes too. And thanks for listening to Blooming Curious today. I know that you have a choice of thousands of other podcasts, but you've chosen this one. And for that, I am so grateful. So thanks so much. And if anything has resonated with you today and you feel inspired, could you please do me a favor? Please tap the share button and share it with a friend and colleague that you think will also find it useful. And if you rate this podcast, take a quick moment to leave a review. You need to go to where it says follow the show and then scroll all the way down to the bottom past all the episodes, and then right at the bottom you'll see it says leave a review. I'd so appreciate that. And with that, I'll love and leave you until next time, and remember to stay blooming curious.